When I look at our history, I realize that our history is not negotiable. It's not defined by slavery. It is a profound history, and we need to teach it in honesty. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Erudition Network. I am back. I have been out for a little bit, and I wanted to make sure that I did a show today, or a session today, so that we can kind of get back in the mix. It's been a while, and so I just wanted to make sure that I was able to get back on and, engage with everyone. There's a lot going on, and I was like torn on what I was actually going to talk about tonight. What was going to be the actual subject, but here's a question for you. What if the best and greatest, I see that my computer just went berserk. I hope you all can still see me. Just went whited out. I guess it said to itself, it's been a while. And now you're back on here. Let's see if we can make it through this. I don't know what that was about. What was I getting ready to ask you was a question. What if the most important, greatest story in human history, what if it wasn't necessarily about division? Because we can argue with the Bible and all of these different stories that have been told that people have made them divisive. What if I told you it was more about unity, and that it's also more about the fact of what we have forgotten? What if behind every society, country, empire, invention, new way of thinking, any movement in justice, there were people who came together, and because we have put this idea of race in the mix of human consciousness, but all these people from these so-called different races, they all came together. What if behind all of that, they were all working together? And what if the world has failed to teach us about it, or many of us have never been told about it? What if that were the case? That's kind of where we're going to go tonight, right? I want to first, again, say thank you to everyone. So we got one person join us. I wasn't really worried about who's going to join the live tonight because it was going to be on late. But I want to welcome back all of you. This Erudition Interactive Black History broadcast is important to me. And I may not have said it at the beginning. I am the host of it and the founder of the Erudition Network. And I had to go through some health issues over the last few weeks. That's why I hadn't joined you. And I want to thank all of those who reached out to me, who sent messages to me on social media, praying for me to get well. And it's still a journey, but I'm getting there. But I just wanted to make sure that I emphasize to you all that thank you. Thank you to all of you who listen, who view, who support, those who reach out, those who pray, and you have helped me so that we can keep this platform and alive. It is hard with my family when I get ill. You notice that me and my wife have both basically been off. There's so many things going on, but we thank you for your undying support and how you continue to engage, even with material that we may have put out weeks ago. And so, as we get into tonight's episode, and we talk about this untold saga of racial unity, not just in America, but just throughout the entirety of history, I want you to know just how important that it is. All right. So before we start, I want to ask you, what one piece of history you were taught that made you proud, that made you feel some kind of way? And I also want you to think about the one that made you question everything. I want you to think about that. And if you watch this as a recording, I want you to go back and I want you to put that into the chat or in the remarks so that we can go focus on that together. Drop that stuff into the chat, drop that stuff in the remarks, because I want this to be interactive. This is not always just a lecture. It's a live interactive program, and we're going to go through a lot of stories. And so I want them to be a part of you. I want you to understand that they're a part of all of us. And as we go through this, so that we can all learn together. I want to make a shout out to my friend Ken Richter. I talked to him the other day. He's an archaeologist. We had a really good talk about history and life and health and everything else. And I wanted to send a shout out to Ken because I really appreciate him reaching out. My cousin David also, who reached out to me as I was going through a lot of different things. I really appreciate all of you all who support us. All right, enough of that. We're going to jump into this. We're going to jump into this. And I want you, when I mention Black history, I don't want you to just think of it as just Black history. Okay, I want you to think of it as world history, as knowledge that is shared by all of us collectively. But we have to call it Black history because a lot of it has been pushed out of general history because pseudo historians, liars, revisionists, right, saw it as Black history and an empowering event for Black people, so they pushed it out. Now that we know that and we clarify that of why we term it Black history, we should also understand that Black history is world history, it's human history, it's a part of everything. But I want to ask you, how many of you have learned history in school beyond the usual names? The Martin Luther King Jr.'s, the Rosa Parks, the Frederick Douglass. If you have been on this live, you know we go a little bit deeper than that. And I'm betting a lot of the stories that I'm going to talk about tonight will be new to a lot of you and will be something that you weren't taught. But I will let you understand that they are factual, they are real, and that they can be researched and looked up by you. And I encourage you to do that. Hidden history is hidden for a reason. And one of the biggest tenets of erudition is to uncover hidden history, to talk about our history so that we can all learn. Sean Anthony, thank you for being with us tonight. Let me also say, if you're out there and in the chat, hey, chime in, drop a comment, let us know you're there. If you're on Facebook and I don't see it, make your way on over to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and you will be able to get up in the chat. It's a live chat, and you will be able to talk to us, and I'll be able to see it. For some reason, Facebook still has been having some problems. All right. I don't want you to get too comfortable, though. I want you all, if you got a chance, get you a notebook, get you a pen. I say this all the time when we do this. Share the stream to others, and let's get down to doing this exploration. Enough of the bloviation. I want to talk about first the wealthiest man who ever lived. Why? Because lately we've been talking a lot about Elon Musk and other rich people and classifying them as these very rich, influential people. And I'm not saying that they're not. But we need to look back in ancient times and see how people used that wealth to better society, to make things better. So my first interactive question for you all for tonight is, who do you think was the richest person in all of history? Of the few people I have on here right now, who do you think was the richest person in all of human history, all of recorded human history? I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. Shout the name out in the chat. Some of y'all might think it's Elon Musk. Some may think that it's Jeff Bezos. Some of y'all might think that it's Bill Gates. Maybe you think that it's a king, of England. Maybe you think it's the Caesar, Julius Caesar or someone like that. But who do you think is the richest person in all of human history? I will tell you that you would have to go further back than any of the men that I just mentioned or any of the people that I just mentioned. Since none of you all have put it in the chat, I'll go further. You'd have to go back. You have to go all the way to the 14th century West Africa. And the answer to the question is Mansa Musa. He was the emperor of the Mali Empire. If you haven't heard of him, I wouldn't stress it too much. Most people aren't taught about him in classes or school. Most don't know who he was, which is wild considering how legendary his wealth was in Africa and in Europe and extending places. Historians estimate that Mansa Musa's fortune was so large and so big that it is really almost impossible to quantify, even by our standards today. He's believed to have been the richest person in history. Now, if you think about that, here you have a African king in medieval times, wealthier than anyone that you have ever seen or possibly will ever see on the so-called Forbes list and industry and empire magazine lists. But Mansa Musa was a lot. He ruled Mali at its peak. Mali was a wealthy, wealthy nation. It controlled gold mines, major trade routes. His kingdom was literally all gold. All gold. Think about that when we think about people being on a gold standard and everything else, but Mansa Musa's kingdom was bursting with gold. When he made his first pilgrimage, his Hajj, to Mecca, at estimated 1324, he traveled with a caravan including hundreds of camels, thousands of attendants, and every one of them were carrying gold. He was traveling in style in Africa, and he wasn't stingy. He handed out so much gold along the way that it flooded the local economies and made them wealthy. It reportedly caused a drop in the value of gold in Egypt, where you now see all these gold remnants due to the oversupply of gold that Mansa Musa shared with other cultures and nations. That's what he was. He spent so much that he depressed gold values in an entire country. But he wasn't just a rich man. He wasn't just a person who had enormous wealth. He believed in knowledge, and the kingdom of Mali believed in knowledge. Their culture pushed knowledge even into Europe. He put Mali on the map to be known in the medieval time. In a famous 1375 European map, they actually have a depiction of him holding a gold scepter and a huge gold nugget in his hand. And it says the richest and noblest king of his land. European kings and rulers wanted to meet him. They wanted to come down to Africa to see the gold. But Mansa Musa founded libraries. He founded universities, religious mosques. Most of us hear only about Timbuktu in songs or in someone mentioning it as a place to conquer. But Timbuktu was a place of learning. It's not a place in the middle of nowhere. Under Musa, Timbuktu became a major center of learning because he wanted people to have knowledge. They attracted scholars from across the entire African world and the Islamic world. And at its height, the Timbuktu Sanko University could host at least 35,000 students. And the city's libraries held over 800,000 manuscripts. They gave people certifications to teach long before the Harvards and Yales and the Oxfords. They taught people. They taught about religions. They taught about how to construct. They taught knowledge. And many of us are not even aware of those universities and how long that they have been around. And if you are one of the people here that are watching this that knew who Mansa Musa was or knew about the Timbuktu universities, congratulations. Because you are probably a minority who is actually learning this, who actually knew this and can actually talk to it to some extent. But a lot of people don't know about it. The achievements of medieval West Africa are not often passed, and many times they are glossed over. And many so-called reputable historians tell you that Africa was a dark continent and there's nothing that came out of it of worth or value. Yet Africa is global history. It's a story. It's a story of wealth. It's a story of knowledge. It's a story of cultural influence. It's a story of how we came about. The fluorescence in Africa is huge. While most of Europe was still in kind of a dark age. And it's a reminder of how advanced those civilizations in Africa were and how long they existed in this world. You should find it inspiring. Even if you are of European birth or you call yourself white, you should still find it inspiring because that knowledge is what helped other kingdoms in Europe to grow. And I hope you do see it as a universal connection, as something that is stronger than what the vision that we keep hearing and seeing in our current society. An African kingdom amassed incredible prosperity, wealth, and scholarship, and they shared it to the world so that everyone could benefit from it. They weren't stingy with it. So the next time someone asks you who's the richest person that ever lived, you can actually say, it may have been a black emperor named Mansa Musa. And somebody will go, who? And you will know, let me unlock this history for you. And who knows? Maybe because you shared that, someone listening will take it and pass it on and pass it on and pass it on. And we will all have an understanding of how important Africa is, not just these, as some politicians have said, these crap hole countries, because they were never taught. Let's go further. It's a game that was put out recently, and everyone got mad because they were talking about African samurai. And my son was like, man, people really got mad about the idea of African samurai. But if we were to hop from Africa, West Africa to feudal Japan. Yeah, from Africa to feudal Japan. We're going from Mali to medieval Japan. History will surprise you. It has things in it that have been hidden. Did you know that an actual black samurai existed? They actually existed. I don't care what the trolls on the internet are telling you. They existed. And I promise you, the facts are there if you choose to look for them. So when the games that people wanted to talk about Yasuke, the African samurai, people got mad. Netflix did an anime called Yasuke. And even though there were creative liberties that are always played in these games and these movies, Yasuke himself was very real. He was a real person. Yasuke is not just a movie. He was a real person. He arrived in Japan in the late 1500s. We know that. It is likely, we believe, that he came as a bodyguard due to Jesuits who were on a mission to take their religion into Japan. And if you know anything about that history, Japan did not want Italian mercenaries, Jesuits, coming into their land. And a lot of times they either killed them or they converted them forcibly. So it's believed that Yasuke may have come over with one of these Jesuits. He is recorded to be at least 6 feet to almost 7 feet tall. Huge black man. And the Japanese were amazed by him. They had never seen a man of his size and of his culture like that before. So the powerful warlord, Oda Nobunaga, he was one of Japan's great unifiers. He was intrigued by Yasuke. And he made Yasuke his retainer. And eventually, he made him a samurai. And though this is a cultural shock to many, it shouldn't be. Yasuke was willing and understanding to adapt. He went from being an possibly enslaved person by the Jesuits, right, to a samurai. He rubbed shoulders with samurai and feudal lords in Japan. He learned their language. He followed their religion, Bushido, and fought along his new unifier. In fact, the history shows us that Yasuke was on Nobunaga's side during the famous rebellion of 1582. And he was there by his side at the warlord's death as a samurai, as an honored participant and a samurai. But there have been people who put out these ideas and this anger that this didn't exist. This is something that's made up, especially in the argument of DEI and all of this black culture things that are being hidden. But I like to look at Yasuke's story as an example of how interconnected the world was. That a black man, dang near 7 feet tall, could be accepted in a society that was pushing outsiders away from Europe, rejecting their religion. Yasuke's presence, him being in Japan, shows the desire for cultural connection, and that not everyone was racist, biased, using religion as a trap. No, these people were meeting each other more than we realized. They were around each other more than we realized. But I'll ask you again, for those of you who watch this later, how many of you even heard of Yasuke outside of the Netflix movie or the video games? How many of you knew his connection and the honor that he had as a samurai? Chat about it. Put it in the remarks. If you're on tonight, you can put it in the chat tonight. But if you never heard about it, you put in there new to me. I never heard that before. I suspect many of you who are not gamers and things like that probably didn't know. Because traditional history classes may mention European traders. They may mention the missionaries. They may mention the abuses that were done against the Jesuits by the Japanese, but they won't tell you often about the African samurai who was honored, who came over with people who they thought were oppressors. See, his life is so compelling that it's finally getting some attention, but then it's also getting negative attention because people then want to use pseudo-history to speculate. They want to lie. They don't want to tell you that he was honored and giving a special position. They don't want to tell you about him symbolizing an idea of being a true samurai, even though he was not a naturally born Japanese person. See, people cosplay the Black Samurai, but there is a great history there and a great story there. Yasuke is a figure worth digging into. And he shows that Black history is not isolated. It's not isolated to Africa, Europe, or the Americas. It is worldwide. It gives it a global context that we don't often attribute to it. If a Black samurai in Japan isn't a cool thing for a young Black kid to think about, I don't know what is. It shows a connection. It also makes you wonder how many other people after Yasuke had untold intercultural exchanges that we just don't know about or have been hidden from us. There are so many doors that have been shut to give you an example of this history. And that's what I'm trying to do for you tonight. I want you to open up and start to study these people. Go look up Yasuke. I'm telling you, you will be amazed at the story. And then come back here. Get in the chat, interactive, and let's talk about it. Let's go further. A lot of times we overlook explorers and pioneers, and we only look at the ones like the Daniel Boones and Columbus, but we ignore others. Let me test your knowledge again. Who was the first person to reach the North Pole? Do you know their name? Do you know who that person is? Do you even know when it happened or what the significance of it was? I will tell you that I was in a class once and someone told me that Robert Peary, the famous Arctic explorer, was the first person to reach the North Pole. And it was a lie. Even Peary will tell you it was a lie. But did you know who it was? I'll tell you, because nobody's putting it in chat. It's not that many of you here tonight. It's a man named Matthew Henson. He was the first person to reach the North Pole. I love telling this story because A lot of people really don't understand. And let me tell you too, he has famous relatives even to this day that are in your forefront, in your eyesight, but we'll get into that in a moment. Matthew Henson is someone you should go and study too, because many people don't remember him, but he was important. Here's what happened. On April 6, 1909, Matthew Henson and a team of explorers who were led by Robert Peary reached what they believed was the North Pole. Henson was only one of the 6 men in the final party who actually reached it. And he was the only Black American in the entire party. When asked about this, Henson said he was the first of the group to set foot at the pole because he was scouting. They put him as the scout. And he was ahead of everybody, even by Peary's own recollection. And for decades, right, even though he was sent out to scout to make sure things were safe, to put himself in harm's way, for decades, all the credit went to Robert Peary. Henson's contributions were largely overlooked because he was a Black man and they could do that. It wasn't until much later that Henson began to get the recognition that he deserved. He wasn't invited to the White House like Robert Peary. He didn't sit in grand receptions. He was just the scout. But I'll tell you this, Matthew Peary wasn't a braggart. I'm sorry. Henson was not a braggart. I could fuffle both of him and Peary's name because the thing with Peary that angered me is that Peary knew and could have spoken to this. And only under duress a lot of times do people admit things. But Matthew Henson lived quietly for years, didn't say a word. He went back and worked as a file clerk. And then when interest started to rise again, he started to get asked about the story. And then people started to realize, wait a minute, he was the scout. And then he was allowed to be interred in Arlington National Cemetery besides Peary in 1988. And people started to correct the racial omission. One of Matthew Henson's relatives is Taraji, who's a Black actress. Most people don't know that. They're not braggarts. Not braggarts. But the fact of the truth is, history is what history is. Taraji Pearson doesn't want to talk, and she does. She has too much about it. Understand the pressures that were put on, and still to this day, people lie and tell you that Robert Peary really deserves all the credit. It's just what it is. Here's another one. I'm from Chicago. Can anyone tell me who founded that city? For all of you who watch this later, who are my audience who are in Chicago, please feel free to type it in there in the remarks. But if you're on here tonight, you can type it in here too. Who founded the city of Chicago? I'll give you a hint. There is a museum in the city that is named after him. I'll give you another hint. He wasn't white. So if you're thinking that it was some French, Indian, or American settler, you're wrong. Chicago was first permanent non-native settler and founder was a Black man of Haitian descent named Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. Chicago, considered the second city, one of the biggest cities in the nation, was established by a black pioneer. DuSable arrived in Chicago in 1770. He married a Native American woman and set up a trading post in what would become Chicago on the Chicago River. By the late 1700s, his homestead had turned into a decent town and a good hub with houses, barns, workshops, and clientele of Native Americans, French, and British traders. Point DuSable was not an ignorant man. He spoke multiple languages. He was respected by multiple cultures. He was an entrepreneur. He was a mediator for the natives and others. He was respected. Yet, for the better part of half a century, Chicago's official histories barely gave him any credit, barely mentioned his name. And it was not until recent decades that he was given a statue and honored, as more historians of color pointed out the genesis of Chicago, and then had to force it upon people to understand how important that was. So if you're from Chicago and you're listening and they tell you that your city is crap and a horrible city and has no history and you need to go back and blacks have destroyed it, make sure you remind them that that city was literally built as a business powerhouse by a black settler, by a black man. Make sure you let them understand that he was an intermediary. Make sure that they understand he was an entrepreneur, not a troublemaker, but someone who helped to make sure trouble didn't come. He's an explorer and a pioneer that we don't talk about. And these pioneers and explorers are important because they remind us that Black history, again, is something to learn by all Americans, because it influences and it has touched all of us. Right? You're talking about Matthew Henson finding the pole, the top of the world, or Point DuSable laying foundations and creating a mark in the Midwest that would go on to help to build other societies and other places that pushed us further west. Many months ago, I talked about a man named Estevanico. Estevanico is also forgotten. He was a Moroccan African man who was part of the first European exploration of the American Southwest in the 1530s. Estevanico was important because the Spanish used him to navigate and go into other places and be accepted by the indigenous people because, again, what is not shared, they had seen Africans before. And they always came not as conquerors. Not as conquerors. Think about a man named James Beckworth, a Black mountain man and an explorer who discovered a pass through the Sierra Nevada. Not mentioned. Not mentioned. Even though that pass became so important for pioneers. But these names aren't generally in your textbooks. They're not generally shared. And if you were to ask yourself, why do you think these people were left out? It wasn't just an accident. It was systemic. It was systemic. You may not feel good about that, but it is the truth. In Henson's case, racism deeply played a part in not letting people understand that a black man was the first to touch the North Pole. Black man in 1909 wasn't going to get that respect. In DuSablo's case, early historians who wrote and put together the American history downplayed him due to racial bias. Because it's not good to understand that one of the biggest, largest, most powerful cities in the country was established by a black man. In one way or another, a lot of people like Estevanico, James Beckworth were pushed out of history. And it takes programs like this for us to put a spotlight back on them. Because when we include them, history suddenly doesn't become just one-sided. And young black people or people of color can understand that they have a richer and more accurate attachment to this country when someone tells them, go back to where you came from. Or attacks them violently. And as we talk about that violence, let's talk about something that everybody for the last 5 to 10 years has talked about. Black Wall Street and the historical amnesia that went along with Black Wall Street. The story of Black Wall Street and the Tulsa Race Massacre has become an eye-opener to many people. Many people I didn't know about it. I remember Tom Hanks got on. I never knew about this. But before I continue, I want to acknowledge that this segment will deal with violence. It will talk about some horrible things. But as I have always said, and I talked to a friend of mine the other day, we got to also focus on the resilience, the desire to rebuild, to grow. Yeah, it's not an easy story, but it's one that we need to be reminded of. Many of you now have heard about Black Wall Street or the 1921 Tulsa Massacre. But if you'd asked that question 10 to 5 years ago, most people, even the folks in Oklahoma, wouldn't have known what you were talking about. When I first read about it years ago, studying history, I was shocked. I was like, wow, nobody's talking about this. And it wasn't in a general high school history book. I had to do some digging, some study. And if you're one of those rare people now who are not aware, let's give you a quick summary. In the early 20th century, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, was a thriving Black community. It had strict segregation placed upon it, but Black entrepreneurs built their own economy there. And whites would come into that area where they could shop freely, where Blacks couldn't go into their places freely. They had stores, they had hotels, they had theaters, they had restaurants, they had doctors, they had blacksmiths, they had everything you would want to see in a modern, thriving city. It was so prosperous that it earned that colloquial Black Wall Street name that we call it. It was a place where the American dream seemed to be thriving after the failure of Reconstruction. Many of the people who had lived there in that Black community were either the children of slaves or they themselves had been slaves. But on May 31st and on June 1st, 1921, everything changed. A white mob became enraged, inflamed by a racially charged accusation that was later found to be not true. but they used it as an excuse to attack Greenwood, to attack the Black people and the businesses. They burned 35 city blocks. Blocks, I didn't say houses, to ash. They destroyed over 1,500 homes and businesses, and killed an estimated 100 to 300 people by white people's estimates of the time. But now we're finding out that that estimate is probably definitely wrong. The Greenwood incident was one of the deadliest incidents of racial violence in U.S. history. Racist whites actually took airplanes to drop dynamite and incendiary devices on people and buildings. And it's one of the first times that American citizens were bombed in their own cities from overhead. The devastation put on that place was total. And what had been known as Black Wall Street was obliterated within a day. That's what happened. Here's the thing. Here comes that hidden amnesia part. After 1921, Tulsa and the nation as a whole actively covered up the massacre. They made it as if it had never happened. There were no prosecutions for the people who attacked. The insurance claims, because those businesses were insured, were denied, and the event was omitted from local and state history. And for decades, survivors and their descendants were told to not speak of it, to remain silent. Schools were made to not teach it. A man named George Monroe, who was a child survivor, once said that after the massacre, his father told his kids, don't mention it, don't talk about it. And the fear was that speaking up would invite more violence, would encourage people to do this again. And this went on for generations. A recent survey found that 83% of the schools at Oklahoma never taught a lesson about the Tulsa race riots. 83%. And larger in Black communities. Most people only learned about this as they came out in recent times, through documentaries, through word of mouth, and even the HBO Watchmen series that was done in 2019. Most people didn't know how bad the Tulsa riots had been. But as I always tell people, God will not be mocked, because what happened was there were people who lived long enough, over 100 years old, to talk about it, to bear witness. So that when the 100th anniversary of what happened came, there was a great lifting of a veil that people were able to know. In Oklahoma, the state was forced to recognize and add it to their curricula. They had to update their books. Teachers that now could teach about it. But that silence had consequences. You see, when Black people had to raise money to rebuild, because they did rebuild, that's the resilience. They had to do it in silence because no one was there to help them. There was no insurance companies to back them out. After 1921, many Black residents rebuilt Greenwood from the ashes. That is the story to me. They had no help. By the 1940s, Greenwood was once again a bustling Black business district. It didn't just get burned down and was gone. People fought to bring it back. And though it was never as wealthy as it had been before, that speaks to the resilience of Black people, the determination and the hope. But because no one could talk about it, urban renewal, highway construction, Reaganomics did what bullets, bombs, and murder could not. It took away that Greenwood area. As the same thing happened to a lot of neighborhoods and across America. So when we talk about hidden history, we have to talk about how they told people not to talk about it, saw them bring it back, and killed them through governmental power. I know schools did not teach about Tulsa. And if you're comfortable, drop a message in chat. Drop a message, like I said. Tell me what you know about it. By learning about Tulsa and Black Wall Street, we honor those who suffered, Black and white. Black and white, who were killed. And we gain insight into how things were going on in this country. It's important that we delve into these things. And the reason that I'm on tonight, when I didn't know what I was really going to talk about, we are denied so many things. We're not told many things. Let's cover something really quickly that came up recently when they were talking about Haitians living in cities and killing dogs, and the lie of the last political situation. And people say, well, why would they do that and know they're lying about Haitians? I've said this many times. The racism has a long memory. Baba Dick Gregory used to say that, has a long memory. The Haitian Revolution that happened from 1791 to 1804 is important. And many of you might say, oh, Eddie, that's not hidden. I know about that. I remember the Haitians fought the French. You know, that was taught. Well, I'll tell you, sort of, it was taught. But usually it's taught in a passing, Americanized way. And the immensely significant parts of it are left out. And we should know it. The Haitian Revolution was the first and truly only successful slave uprising in history. Let me say it again. The successful slave uprising in history that founded a nation. And people are still mad about it. That's why Haiti has so many problems. It's not the witchcraft, but there's reasons behind all of the lies and the confluence of bad things that have happened to them. Enslaved Black people in the French colony of Saint Domingue, rose up and defeated one of the grandest, largest, most powerful armies in the world, Napoleon's army, and established the independent nation of Haiti in 1804. If we were just to say that, that's incredible on its own, that they whooped Napoleon. His armies could not stop them. But the ripple effect is really what's important. And it's also what is often hidden. By the late 1700s, Saint-Domingue, now it is known as Haiti, was France's most richest colony. They gained a lot of money. They produced sugar and coffee, and they had brutal slave labor. They killed slaves. But inspired by the ideas of liberty from the French Revolution and their own unquenchable thirst for freedom, they said, well, hey, we're French too. And the enslaved people rebelled in 1791. And famous leaders like Toussaint L'Ouverture and others led armies of formerly enslaved Africans in a 13-year war with the French. And when the French realized they couldn't handle them, they called in the Spanish and the British, and they whooped them all. So despite the unimaginable odds of being defeated and killed, by 1804, they prevailed, and Haiti was born as the second independent country in the Americas, the first being the United States. And you would think that the United States would be like, wow, they threw off tyranny. This is what liberty is supposed to be about. And it's something that we should have been teaching in classes. But no. The Americans didn't want people to know about it. They didn't want slaves in America to know about the Haitian Revolution, because that scared people throughout the world. It terrified the United States. President Thomas Jefferson, who famously wrote the Declaration of Independence, he was a slaveholder. But he was so blown away by how these Africans had beat the British, the French, and the Spanish, he refused to recognize Haiti's independence. The United States did not actually recognize Haiti until the Civil War. And we know why. What happened after the Civil War. And the Southern states feared Haiti's example might inspire slave rebellions in the South. So they kept it closed. They didn't talk about it. Here's the other part that a lot of historians don't tell you. Haiti led to the expansion of the United States. The Haitian Revolution, the Haitians' victory, led to the expansion of the United States. I know you were taught about the Louisiana Purchase. You know, the reason why the U.S. got that huge swath of territory and we were able to go west and enforce manifest destiny. We got that huge swath of land from France in 1803. And it is tied to Haiti. Napoleon had taken over France, initially wanted to use Louisiana as a breadbasket, as a place to feed Santo Domingue. He wanted to build a North American empire in the South that extended into South America. But when the Haitians threw off the tyranny and they were beating the crap out of Napoleon's troops, then Napoleon's forces lost Santo Domingue. And Napoleon realized he could not fight the wars in Europe and do what he was doing. So he gave up the idea of the New World. And he decided to sell Louisiana to the U.S. for a bargain to cover war debts. So they sold the Louisiana Purchase, and that doubled the size of the United States. So while we're telling you that Haitians are dog eaters and cat eaters, witchcraft demons, if not for the Haitians, America might not stretch from the Mississippi to the Rockies due to the consequence of Haitians throwing off imperial power. And I can tell you, many of you who will watch this do not know Haiti's impact on the Louisiana Purchase. Because if you did, right, you'd have a sense of understanding how, again, African Black interaction influenced the world. Think back to what we were talking about Mansa Musa earlier. And then the puzzle pieces of history fall into place in a different way. Suddenly, you don't see Thomas Jefferson as in the same way. You don't praise him as the writer of the Declaration of Independence. You start to get the timelines together and understand, how did we get that Louisiana Purchase? Something that was lauded in Jefferson's presidency. Then you start to understand the bravery and the resilience of Haitian revolutionaries and their global legacy. And then you start to understand why Western powers still hate them. Haiti's revolution sent a message to enslaved people in the Americas and across colonized nations everywhere. Freedom is possible. You don't have to balk and die under a brand and chains. It inspired resistance, fear. And for that, Haitians were ostracized for their audacity. They were forced to pay indemnity later on to France. Initially, a ransom for former slaveholders who had lost property there. They had to give their wealth. And then we look at the hardship and the starvation and the problems in Haiti. They were pushed down with people like Papa Doc, who were financed by European and American powers to keep them held down. And see, this is hidden history not because it's secret, but because traditional narratives, Western narratives, Eurocentric, xenophobic narratives have held it down. You hear about the French Revolution. You hear about the American Revolution. But not that Haitian Revolution that established a nation from slaves. In recent times, people are starting to talk a little bit more about it. You see more documentaries, more things online. But the problem is, we don't tell the truth. We don't tell the full truth. Because, see, the story of Haiti is a story of freedom achieved against all odds. And it also shows us how people, other cultures, ostracize, attack for ancient history. So, the next time someone tells you, why doesn't Black history get any attention? Remind them that even though we talk about Dr. King, Rosa Parks, Mandela, there are world-changing events like Haiti right, that we should be talking about because they literally reshaped the world. I'm going to go a little bit, about 30 minutes further, and then we get off here because we haven't been on. And I want to finish this out. Because the other thing I wanted to talk about tonight were inventors. I don't think you could talk about Black people, Black history, without talking about inventors. They were innovators, inventors on all levels, despite their ancestors and them many times being held in chains. And though we talked about leaders, we've talked about explorers, we've talked about events that changed the world. But Hidden Black History also has to talk about innovators and inventors and how they changed the world, who they touched. If I were to ask people to name me 5 famous Black inventors and scientists from history, appallingly, because I have asked this question, many people couldn't name me more than 1. Some could get to 3. Very few. And if I asked them about white inventors or innovators or scientists, they could tell me about Thomas Edison or Albert Einstein and Madame Curie and on and on and on. But if I asked them about a person like Dr. Daniel Hale Williams or Dr. Charles Drew, they don't know who they are. But if not for these people, your life would be greatly different. They made breakthroughs that saved lives every day, and yet they remain shadows, hidden in history. Dr. Daniel Hale Williams in 1893. Automobiles had barely been invented. We were coming out of Reconstruction. And a Black man, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, performed one of the world's first successful open heart surgeries in Chicago. I learned about Dr. Daniel Hale Williams when I was about 6 years old from my teacher, Ms. Gibson. That this Black surgeon was a heart surgery pioneer, and that his knowledge was taken and then hidden. A man came into Chicago hospital with a stab wound to the chest. Without the benefit of what we have today as modern, because remember, this was 1893, of x-rays, of imaging, Dr. Williams determined the man had a tear near his heart. He opened the man's chest. This is something at that point in time, even during the Civil War, that was rarely, if ever, done. And he operated on the sac around the heart. He sutured the wound, and the man survived. At this time, when surgery was considered arcane, people would die just because the doctor didn't know. Dr. Williams was able to operate on the major muscle of the body and save a man's life. Dr. Williams had founded Providence Hospital in Chicago, which was the first Black-owned hospital in America and one of the only places that would treat Black patients and also train Black nurses and doctors at the time. So he was a groundbreaker. He was an innovator. But he was also a teacher who wanted to pass that knowledge on to Black healthcare workers at a time where they couldn't be treated in white hospitals. And his knowledge was taken and used by white surgeons who wouldn't let him walk into their facilities. Innovators who still gave. Think about the Mansa Musa who inspired others. Now let's talk about Dr. Charles Drew. If you're one of the people in this world who've ever donated blood or know someone who's ever received blood, Dr. Charles Drew touched your life. He was a surgeon. He was a thinker. He was a researcher. He was a father. He was a teacher. But what he left to the world, he pioneered methods on how to long-term store blood plasma. This was so important for armies, for people. Anyone who could get hurt. He organized the first large-scale blood bank. And in the early 1940s, during World War II, his innovations in blood banking saved countless of lives on the battlefields. He led that program that shipped blood to British soldiers. Go look it up. It was called Blood for Britain. And then he became the first American Red Cross blood bank creator. But because of segregation, because of the racist policies of America, because of everything that, again, separates us, that allows people to separate us, the American Red Cross initially decided that they wanted to separate blood donations by race, which Dr. Drew said had no scientific basis. He protested against it. Told him, no, this blood should be used to save people. But again, it's one of those racial things in history that men who showed the world how to do something were often held down because of this racial lie. People get on here and they lie about Dr. Drew to try to make his story stronger. They tell you that he was hurt or hit at a auto accident, that he died because he was denied transfusion of blood because he was Black. That's not true. He did die from a car accident in the 1950s. But because Black hospitals didn't deny, he received excellent care. But unfortunately, the loss of blood was too much, and they couldn't save him. Black doctors did everything that they could. I say that because I hate the way we massage and we add things to the history that are not true. And I want you to understand that Blacks weren't racist in who they treated. The society and the system at the time was. And that's an important part of that story to remember. We are people who have been a part of innovation. We could talk about Garrett Morgan, who invented the early gas mask and that saved lives in World War I. We talk about how he improved the traffic light and the warning signals to make sure people weren't getting ran over. We could talk about Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson, a physicist whose theoretical work at Bell Labs helped pave the way for technologies like your touch tone phones, fiber optic cables, caller ID, call waiting. People who gave that aren't often talked about. I want you to go and look these people up because they're important. They're important. We often talk about the civil rights movement, talk about Dr. King, talk about Rosa Parks, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about those people who, even to this day, are affecting your life. Are affecting your life. I have about 15 minutes. I want to say something before I get ready to get off here. Me and my boys, we sat down and we watched I added this in my thing toward the end. I love cowboy movies. I always have. I don't know. I love Westerns. And we sat down and we watched this show about Bass Reeves. And again, when they make movies and shows, they add things to it. But one of the things I wanted my sons to understand as we were watching is how important the black man was to the American cowboy. The real American cowboy. Yeah, a lot of guys out here walking around cowboy hats, rodeo pins, and all this stuff. You got a lot of guys going, yeehaw. But they don't really understand the history of the West. When you ask them, they talk about John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, and I love those guys on films. You know, they talk about the lone white gunslinger that comes in to bring justice to the town. Because, again, that's a revision, though. And I had to learn that Westerns were revisions. It's something that Hollywood was made to sell us about the American uniqueness of the West. But here's the hidden truth of it. 1 in 4 cowboys in the Old West, think about this now. 1 in 4 cowboys in the Old West was black. Yeah. 25% of the cowboys who pushed those cattle through, tamed horses, those who shaped the legend of the West were African American, former slave. And you rarely see that in those films. After the Civil War, a lot of the enslaved men who had skills with horses and cattle and had done all of the work of herding and everything else, because a lot of the slave owners moved their slaves down to Texas, especially during the Civil War. Well, when they were free to find work on the open range, ranch owners, desperate for these new free men skill sets, hired them. And many black men, right, went out and became cowboys because they knew how to rope, they knew how to ride, they knew how to do all of those things. Forced labor on southern plantations were cattle ranches. And these black cowboys, they faced discrimination in frontier towns. Hotels wouldn't serve them. Racists tried to kill them. But out on that range, it was a level playing field. What mattered was the product, the skill, the toughness, the teamwork. How do we get through these places? The indigenous don't seem to attack the black cowboy as much. They earned respect because they could do what others could not do. You need a cowboy when 1,000 longhorn cattle are stampeding. You need a cowboy. We talk about some of them, but we don't give the full history. One of my favorite, other than Bass Reeves, is Nat Love. He wrote an autobiography recounting his adventures on roping, shooting, and even meeting people like Billy the Kid. Go look up Nat Love. Go look up Bose Ickard. Right? He rolled with the legendary trailblazer Charles Goodnight, that everybody loves to talk about. It was the model for a character in Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove, one of the most beloved cowboy stories of all time. And then there's my boy Bass Reeves. Bass wasn't a cowboy per se. He was a lawman. He was a black lawman. He was so legendary that it almost brings you to tears to think about what he had to endure. He was born enslaved. He escaped the plantation during the Civil War. He later became a deputy U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma Territory. And it is said that Bass Reeves, by records, arrested over 3,000 felons in his career. He was an expert tracker, an expert shot, and had such a presence that cowboys wanted to remember him. And he is the inspiration for the Lone Ranger. Even though they made him white, they put a mask on him. But everything about him, the skilled rider, accompanied by Native Americans and partners, which is what Bass would use. He was freely, actively involved with Native American trackers. They took Bass Reeves' life and they put it on a white man. It's crazy. I grew up loving Westerns. I still do. But when I realized later on that 25% of those cowboys were black, and they weren't regulated to be the side character as you see in a lot of those films. The omission of blacks, Mexicans, Native Americans is troubling, because we've taken cowboy pop culture and gave it a skewed image of the West. People in other countries call Americans cowboys because they see or they fixate on a white man shooting a gun. But in reality, the West was diverse. Black freemen, white Civil War vets, Mexican vaqueros. They work side by side. Yet we don't talk about it. We give more credit to white outlaws like Billy the Kid and Jesse James. White men who were poor, felt that they were wronged. But we don't talk about Ben Hodges or Issam Dart. Look them names up. And though we can start to see history try to correct itself, we also see America try to revision and tell us not to learn these histories. I'll tell you that the real cowboy tradition itself, the skill, the lingo, words like the lariat, rodeo, they come from people of color. The Mexican vaqueros. But enslaved Africans in the Carolinas and certain parts of the South, they had traditions of cattle tending cattle and how to rustle them from the motherland. They had skill sets with animals that had been passed down. So when you default to John Wayne or Clint Eastwood or the Marlboro Man or whoever you want to call, I want you to think about those people of color, the tapestry of faces that actually made up the West. I want you to look beyond the white boy with the big rodeo belt and the cowboy hat. And not to dismiss him, but to let him understand the real deep history that look and that culture comes from. Because the cowboy belongs to Black history as much as any other part of history in American society. But we don't talk about it. A good friend of mine, I don't know if I have it over here, I will put the book's title in our chats. There are books that are now being written about it. The people are talking about it. Because we need to. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that was a lot. I know we went on a journey here, and I covered a lot of things, and a lot of people weren't even on tonight. But I wanted to do this episode. I wanted to go a little bit long because I haven't really been here. We went from African emperors, samurais, surgeons, cowboys, North Pole adventurers, Tulsa, Haiti. We've talked about continents. We've talked about things that happened centuries ago, things that happened decades ago. And I want you to feel energized from these stories. I want you to take this history and this knowledge and pass whatever you didn't know that was covered tonight. Because even though it may have been hidden, it wasn't completely taken away. So as I wrap this up, as I'm getting ready to get out of here, I just want you to reflect on why this matters. The reason why Erudition, when we talk about history, uncovering hidden histories, is so important. It's not a trivia game. It's not a neat trick that we talk about to make people feel like, oh, he knows more. It's don't get me wrong. It's cool to impress your friends with facts. But it's not really about that. It's about the knowledge. It's about the recognition. It's about the understanding. It's about the empowerment that it brings to young Black people, so that the first people that they see in a book are not slaves. Will you recognize the contribution and the experiences of those who have been marginalized? Did we do justice to their memory, to the past? We enrich this country, and we recognize that Black history is history. And it is integral to who we are as human beings. Everyone deserves to see that there are people like them who were heroes, geniuses, innovators, explorers, creators. Hidden history also teaches empathy, and it removes ignorant statements that are divisive. When you learn about Tulsa or the Haitian Revolution, it gives context to the struggles that we see right now still going on. It breaks down the false walls between different communities and their histories. And it lets us realize, white, Black, or whatever, we are very much involved with each other. And we start to see how intertwined we are. If the richest man was from Africa, if the city of Chicago was founded by an innovative, genius Black man, if the music, if the inventions that you use were created by Black people also, then you start to feel connected. It fosters respect. It tells us that it's not just one-sided. So I want you to ask yourself, what hidden history that we talked about tonight resonated with you? What stayed with you? We could have covered a lot more, but the things we talked about, what didn't you know? Let us know. Drop it in the chats, drop it in the remarks. This is a conversation, and I'm here to have it. A friend of mine said the other day, I don't want to come in and just take over the program. I want to hear from you. As I close, I want to thank you again. Thank you for welcoming me back after this health issue. I want to thank you for interacting with my wife and when my kids were on. It means the world to us that people have started to really follow Erudition, and that our subscribers have grown enormously over the last few months. The fact that you watch and you invest your time to learn is important to me, and it shows the power of knowledge. When Tina's teaching you on Adroit, or she's talking to you about things on Adroit Living, when I'm talking to you about history on the Interactive, I want you to keep that going. I want you to encourage your families. I want you to tell people to go out and get these books and that we've written. I want you to go out and encourage, and then do some digging for yourself. Because when you start digging and bring that to us, we elevate the conversation. History is not static. It's like a photograph that develops over time. And what happens is that once we start whitewashing or overlooking, we run into a problem where we don't see the full picture. We are part of the process. You asking those questions, interacting with us, doing your own research, listening to us and helping us to grow and telling us things so that we can dig into research. We learn like the old Africans who sat down with their elders and had an inclusive education. We are more than what we think we are. We follow the Bible by going in and studying to show ourselves approved. We uncover facts and richness, and we restore lost ideas to all of us. I know I wanted to close, but I felt that those things needed to be said. And I don't want to be on a soapbox, but it is so importantly. But I hope that you enjoyed this Erudition Interactive. I know I did. I really did. Getting back, I might have gone over a little bit, but that's okay. But it's just so much good stuff that we all need to be talking about. And I didn't want to cut any of it out. I wanted to touch as much of it as I could. Ladies and gentlemen, please, 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 I didn't put on our banner. If you want to support the Erudition Network, if you want to support us in any kind of way, there's a ticker down here at the bottom. You can donate to our Cash App, which is $ the Erudition Network. Everything you do helps us, and things that we do with cameras, programs, and things that we use to be able to teach and grow knowledge. I will close out here by letting you know knowledge is power. A history of our people, all of our people, lives in us. I want you to keep going for those stories. Keep digging into what we talked about tonight. Look up Yasuke. Look up Bass Reeves. Look up Mansa Musa. And until next time we're on God Willing, please join us again. Subscribe. Encourage others to subscribe. Stay curious. Stay courageous. Keep trying to learn. And as always, stay erudite as we all seek to learn together. Thank you all. Have a really great rest of your weekend. Please share this episode and comment when you can. Thank you. Look for the book advertisement at the end. Have a good one.
From Eddie K. Phillips, founder of the Erudition Network, comes 101 Black History Questions, a groundbreaking book that challenges what you thought you knew and uncovers the stories history tried to hide. Perfect for classrooms, families, and curious minds. Get the digital copy today on Amazon.